Okay, fam. Let me start with this random gist. You see this Snapchat app, eh? I've been doing full workouts just to record, videos sometimes, and then sometimes to take pictures, and it's not been funny. Only to find out this week, that there is a timer feature. I was just suffering all along. I've just been suffering myself all along. Can you imagine that? Eh? Because I assumed that it didn't exist. I never checked. So my assumptions were just has been blocking my view, basically. Going to laugh at me. But that right there is the number one lesson I learned this week. Assumption can make you suffer for nothing. So don't assume. Check, and be sure, right? The first book I read this week is called Good Inside by Dr. Becky Kennedy. Dr. Becky said something deep in this book. She said most people like kids, adults, even you and I are not broken. Sometimes we're just misunderstood, right? Because what if your partner, your child, or even your team member was actually good inside, but reacting from confusion or hurt? I know so people react to hurt, to confusion, to issues different. Just like Snapchat that I just talked about earlier. It was not broken. Nothing was wrong with it. I just didn't read the manual. I never asked questions, so I just assume. So it's the same with life. You need to ask before you assume, and I think this is so important, right? It's very important. So yeah, let me gist you about the second book that I read this week, Nightbitch by Rachel Yoder. It starts with this woman, a stay-at-home mom, who begins to believe she's turning into a dog. Yes, you heard that right. A literal dog. And at first you're like, haha, what's going on here? But when you sit with it, you realize it's not about the dog. It's about how much of herself she felt like she was losing. She was beginning to lose herself, right? Because she got pregnant. Anytime she looks into the mirror, she sees fur growing on her neck, right? And, she started growling in frustration. She was overwhelmed, invisible. She felt silenced by the presence of being a good mother and all of those things. And I won't lie, I felt that part deeply. How many women we wake up, eh? Wake up one day and realize they don't even recognize themselves anymore. I remember when I got pregnant, like at first, pregnancy is a thing of joy. At first, I was very excited and all of that, but the body changed, everything, and we just have to accept it like that. And there's this stereotype, there's this I don't know how to put it, that the society will now put on women, the pressure and everything. It's not just fair at all. That's why you have to know personally who you are, right? And shout out to all moms out there. I'm using the opportunity to say shout out to all moms. You guys are amazing, right? And even to mothers, intending mothers, prospective mothers, shout out to you guys. You guys are amazing. Your waiting, I pray that it will not be in vain in Jesus' name. I know this is a book review, so you wake up to a body change. You're not even dreaming of a career or art or travel. You're dreaming of peace and a full night's sleep. Ah, I remember when I was pregnant, if I don't eat an apple, I can't get off my bed. I can't get up from my bed. I will be there tired and weak until I'm able to eat an apple. And it took me a while to discover that an apple can do it. Let's get back into the book. This book, it's weird, yes, but it's also raw and free. It reminds you that you're still human, still wild, still allowed to want more, right? One thing I took away from Night Beach is this: don't let roles erase your identity. Don't let being a mother, being a wife, or whatever, don't let it erase your identity. You can be a wife, a mother, a daughter, and still be an artist, a dreamer, a woman with wild, worthy desires. Yes, they are valid. You don't need to go full dog. Please don't. I beg you, don't. But maybe it's time to howl a little and ask yourself, who was I before I became pregnant? Who was I before I became who they expected me to be? Because sometimes I think we really need to ask ourselves, these questions. Now, after all that fire and emotion, let's bring in some calm logic. I read Thinking Fast and Slow a while ago, but it's one of those books that stays in your mind and live rent free. Honestly, the author, Daniel Kahneman, explains that our brain works in two modes basically. System one is fast, automatic, emotional, and reactive, like it reacts really fast. Then system two is slow, deliberate, logical, reflective, right? Now here's where it gets real. Most of us operate with system one almost all the time, even though we deny it. But that's how we operate, and that's why we make impulse decisions sometimes. That's why we assume things without even thinking. Hello, Snapchat filter. Snapchat timer. Hello. But true growth, true adulting lives in system two, because that's where the logic happens. That moment when you pause and you ask yourself, is this feeling real or is it just a habit? Am I reacting or actually thinking through this, right? Thinking fast and slow reminded me that my emotions are valid, but they're not always wise. If you act on your emotions, most of the times you act wrong, right? You will be on a long thing. Sometimes you need to take a step back and give your brain a minute to catch up with your art. I think that is really important. And this book is a really good read. Like when I read it, I realized that wow, a lot of things that we think that I just did it. Maybe I'm logical. No, my dear, you're on system one, automatic. And that leads me to one major lesson I learned this week. Outside the books. I was listening to Pastor Sam Adeyemi on Channels TV, and what he said shook me. He said something like this: culture can define your beliefs, and until your environment changes, your mindset never shifts. This is amazing. I sat there thinking, how many of us are walking around with outdated beliefs just because that's how we were raised? That's what we saw growing up. A woman should never do this. You must suffer before you succeed. Don't ask too much questions. Even me, I grew up around people who didn't even really read books, right? I know, just like I mentioned recently, that research shows it says that the average Nigerian reads less than one book per year. We're scrolling endlessly, not learning deeply. And I don't say this to shame anyone, honestly, but to say we can choose to do better. One book, one voice, one note, right? One voice note, one vlog. Every time you expose yourself to new knowledge, you're just learning. You're not just learning, basically. You're not just learning. You are rewiring your mind. Something is breaking, something is shifting. You're basically rewiring your mind. Something is breaking, it's breaking patterns and building a life with more awareness. And I think this is really cool, right? So if you ask me what this week is really about, it's about asking questions before assuming. It's also about knowing you're more than your role. You're still a woman, you're still a man with our own fire, with his own fire. It's about slowing down and thinking deeper. And most of all, it's about challenging the culture that tells you to shriek and stay silent or stop dreaming. You deserve to learn. You are allowed to ask questions. You are not stuck. You are just one book, one thought, or even one bold step away from change. I'm Abby, and this is your weekly book, G's plus Sparkle Quiz. Let's keep growing together. I love you guys.